friends, this is part 2 of my video about how to use a sewing machine. Check out part 1 if you haven't already yet.
Okay, so we are now ready to sew. What I've got here is a scrap piece of fabric. I've chosen white today and purple thread so that you can see it really well, but usually you want to pick a thread that goes with your fabric. So we're going to talk about seam allowances. We talked about seam allowances before when we were hand stitching, but the way you mark a seam allowance on a sewing machine is you use this metal plate that's underneath your presser foot, and it's got little markings on it that shows you the seam allowance. Typical seam allowance is 5/8 of an inch, which is 1 centimeter, I think. I need to double check that conversion. But what I do is I actually use masking tape to mark it off so that I have a pretty good idea of where I need to sew. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna place my fabric under the presser foot, and I'm gonna line up the edge of the fabric with that masking tape. That's how I know I'm gonna have a straight line. I put my presser foot down to hold the fabric, and now I'm gonna turn my hand crank towards me to put my needle in the into the fabric. Okay, and this is just a practice piece so we get used to the machine. I'm gonna go forward a couple of stitches, and then I'm gonna back stitch, and then I'm gonna keep going. Okay, and I'm gonna go all the way to the end, and I'm gonna practice my pivot. One thing I want you to notice while I'm sewing is where I place my hands. So I put one hand in front and one hand beside. These are the hands that are gonna sort of guide my fabric. One thing I also want you to notice is when I stop, I don't lift my hands off. Make sure you keep your hands on to make sure that your fabric goes where you want it to go. Now, as I said before, we're always going to back stitch at the beginning and the ends of our seams. So when I get to the end, I'm gonna push my button in and go backwards and then a little bit forward. When I'm done, I turn the crank towards me to lift my needle out, and I pull the fabric out. Now, sometimes, this is a great example, it's gonna feel a little bit hard to pull out, and you might see you've got like 3 loops coming out of the bottom or 3 threads coming out of the bottom. That just means that your needle's not quite in the right position. All you have to do is turn it like a little bit towards you and then pull, and you'll have those 2 threads. And then you can trim, and you're done. I also want to talk about when you're sewing with pins. So what you need to know is when you're sewing on a sewing machine with pins, you should always have them set in perpendicular to the seam line. This makes it easier to pull out when you get there. And you also never, ever, ever, ever run over a pin, because you could either break your pin or your needle, and that's a problem because it could be dangerous because they fly when they shatter. All right, so I'll show you what I do. I just sew forward, following my seam allowance. And when I get to the point just before where my foot is gonna go over the needle, I stop, I turn the hand wheel to put the needle in so nothing moves, and then I pull my pin out. That's why I like to put them this way. All right, so as I said, there are different kinds of machines, and I have 2 different kinds of machines that I use at school for sewing club, and both are kind of different, which is great. So as I said before, most machines are basically the same. You've got, your needle, you've got the throat plate, you've got the presser foot, I've got the pedal on the ground, I have my hand crank, I have my stitch selector, all that kind of thing. The way this is different is a little bit in how it's threaded. So the first thing you'll notice is that I don't have a post that goes up, I have one that goes side to side. For that, all you're gonna do is put your thread on like this, and there'll be something that looks kind of like this that you're gonna stick on, okay? That helps keep I think I put that on backwards. That helps keep the thread on. All right, so the next thing we're gonna do is follow the arrows, but again, it's the same sort of thing. It goes to the side, down and around the tension. All right, so we're gonna put this in here. We're gonna follow the arrows down and up and down again. Okay, I'm gonna turn this on so I have some light, and I'm gonna thread my needle. All right, so that's through. The other way this machine is different is the bobbin. So instead of pulling the side off, don't drop your bobbin like I did. Instead of pulling the side off, the bobbin is actually in the throat plate. And this doesn't have a case. So we're gonna put the bobbin in, and you'll notice, much like the bobbin case, there's like a little groove that you wanna get your thread in just so that it's caught in place. And just like we did with the other one, we're gonna hold onto our thread, turn the hand crank, put the needle in, and bring up our bobbin thread. All right. Once I got it up, I'm gonna give a little tug, and there comes my thread. Brown bobbin is all I had. I'm not sewing with this, so I'm not worried about the color. I'm gonna give it a little trim. All right, and now I can push this back into place. The other way this machine is a little bit different is the way you back stitch. So instead of being a button you press in, this is a button that you push in like that, okay? This here is gonna tell us the length of our stitches. I like between 2 and 3, and this tells us what kind of a stitch we're doing, a straight stitch, okay? So that's basically how this machine is a little bit different. So now I've shown you everything you need to know about the sewing machines that we have at school or you might have at home. So what you need to do is practice using the machine before you're ready to sew your project. So my sewing machine readiness checklist is you need to be able to do a pivot, okay, practicing on paper. You need to be able to thread the machine without looking at the video. And you need to be able to back stitch. And you need to show me that you can do all of those things on some fabric and follow a seam allowance. So once you've shown me those things, you can get started.